Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today, wherever you might be. So today we're going to be talking about how to perfect your Salesforce data backup and recovery strategy. So without further ado, we should probably start with some introductions. So my name is Ali, and that's me on the right. I'm a software engineer here at Gearset, and I've been working on our data backup tool for just over a couple of years now. And I'm joined by my colleague, Alex.
Hi there, I'm Alex. I am also a software engineer here at Gearset and who's been working on backup for about 2 years or so.
So I realised there's not a lot to differentiate us, so I thought I'd add some extra help. So Alex is into a bunch of different sports, and he listens to lots of cool music, and I wear a hat quite often, especially more so because I can't go to the hairdressers because it's shut because of a pandemic. So I thought it'd be good to cover what we're going to cover today. So we've done the introductions, we're now doing an agenda, but after that we'll get into why you should be backing up your Salesforce data. And then we'll get into what we actually mean by a backup solution. And then we'll cover how to get the most out of that solution and make it effective. Following that, we'll get into how to go about restoring data from a backup. And then we'll go through a couple of demos to describe some incidents that you may encounter, especially with regards to data loss. And then we'll leave some time at the end for questions, but feel free to drop questions into the chat as we go along. Okay, so why should you be backing up your Salesforce data? Isn't it in the cloud? This is something we hear a lot actually from people, and like I said, we have a lot of conversations with people in the Salesforce ecosystem, and something that comes up quite frequently is companies often don't realize that they need to think about backing up their Salesforce data. It's quite easy for people to incorrectly assume that Salesforce offers more in terms of backup security than they've ever claimed to. And as a result, it's often not on people's radar as something that they need to care about. So when it comes down to risk, yes, the risk of a catastrophic incident, and the classic example of someone spilling a cup of coffee over their computer, that's extremely low when you're using a platform like Salesforce. That responsibility for mitigating that risk is Salesforce's responsibility, and they do a fantastic job of doing that. So they operate a huge platform, and it has great reliability. But the risk hasn't disappeared entirely. Salesforce used to offer a data recovery service. This was retired in July, at the end of July last year, 2020. So this option is no longer available. And many companies were relying on this as the last resort in the event of an incident. They didn't have any other cover for themselves, which means that if your business doesn't have a backup solution, since the data recovery service has gone away, then you are vulnerable to losing or corrupting your data. So what I wanted to do was just describe in a bit more detail the kind of things we're talking about with regards to data incidents. So we'll go through a few examples here. Some of them are concrete things that have actually happened. Some of them are a bit more general about commonly occurring scenarios. So I'll start off talking about an incident that became known, maybe somewhat affectionately, as Permageddon. So this happened in May 2019, and an internal update to Salesforce affected some orgs, and the nature of that effect was these orgs had their permissions model corrupted. This meant that all user profiles were granted the permission to view and modify all data, which is quite a terrifying prospect. So that means even a low-powered user could make any changes they wanted to data, but also view any data. So if you think of the example of like a educational establishment, That would mean students could get full access to everyone's exam results, and they could also change their own exam results, which is bad. So Salesforce reacted to this appropriately, and they deleted all the affected permissions, which reduced the risk of data getting corrupted, which is the right thing to do to limit that impact. But it did mean that admins then had to rebuild their org's security model, which can be very complex. Those businesses that didn't have an effective backup solution, they'd have to just do this manually, and that might be starting from first principles again and figuring it all out. And especially if an org has been around for a long time, maybe this stuff is documented, maybe it isn't, but that's a very labor-intensive process. But if you did have a backup solution in place, then you could recreate your security model fairly painlessly. So I'll jump into another example, and this is what we've termed the NA14 hardware failure. So this was an outage that happened in 2016 in one of Salesforce's main North American data centers. And whilst web applications that exist in the cloud, they still exist on some hardware somewhere. So there was a power outage at a data center, which caused some issues, and it made people's Salesforce orgs completely inaccessible. So people weren't able to get at the data, they weren't able to change their information in Salesforce. And it left a lot of companies unable to operate for the duration of the outage. So if you think of your sales team having no access to the things that they use on a daily basis, they might have crucial calls coming up and have their hands tied. That was compounded by a secondary failure that was sort of related to the first one. And due to inconsistencies in the backup files, Salesforce's internal backup files, it meant that Salesforce wasn't actually able to recover from their most recent backup, and they actually had to use a backup even earlier back, which meant that the gap of data that was lost was slightly bigger. I'll move on to human errors. So any system that's out there is vulnerable to human errors. We're all humans, we all make mistakes. And these can range in impact from being a small inconvenience, someone clicks the wrong button, thinks they're doing one thing, is actually doing another, loses a record. But they can be disastrous. It's very easy to make sweeping changes. Again, we speak to lots of users and we hear all sorts of horror stories. I think one example that's quite representative, it's the kind of understandable mistake that we're all liable to make at some point. So there was a user who was intending to add 2,500 records to their org, and they made a mistake. So they tried to remove the 2,500 records they'd added using some criteria, but this criteria actually encompassed many more records. So instead of removing 2,500 records, they actually removed over 100,000 records. And that was compounded by no one noticing that mistake for a day. So that was more churn that went into the data and made it a more complex thing to undo. And it can take weeks to recover from incidents like these. If you have an outdated backup, for example, you're working from old data, you need to find the data that you've lost. You need to figure out how to load that back into Salesforce, and you need to validate that it's correct and that you've done the recovery accurately, which is a significant amount of effort and can cause a lot of disruption to a business. Unfortunately, there's another way that humans are involved, and it can be a malicious act. Users have a lot of power in the system. They can make changes, update records, delete things, all part of their normal operation. But they can also cause damage on purpose. And Alex and me were chatting to someone a couple of days ago, and this was a former company, but someone got dismissed, and they went and deleted 1,000 account records on their way out the door just to cause damage. Fortunately, the people we were speaking to, they did have a backup solution, so it's quite easy for them to recover. And it's very hard to mitigate against this risk. There are also the potential for bugs in data integrations. I have a small child and I watch a lot of Pixar movies, and this is a scene from WALL-E where and I thought it was quite representative. So there's a bunch of robots here that all have jobs that they're meant to carry out, and they're very useful jobs, but these are the robots that have gone a bit wrong and they cause trouble. And I think that is a good way to describe this kind of situation. So many companies have automated integrations in their Salesforce orgs, nightly, hourly jobs that change data, make updates, and do tasks so humans don't have to. They're very powerful tools. They can operate very quickly, and they often operate without human intervention. They just run doing their thing. And so if there are mistakes in these integrations, they can have quite devastating consequences. And it may even take a while for you to notice if no one has been involved in checking the results of the things that they've done. So one more thing I just wanted to talk about here was measuring that disruption. So two concepts are the recovery point objective and the recovery time objective. So if you imagine an incident happening at the 12 o'clock position here, so if a user has accidentally deleted a record, the recovery point objective is the amount of time that's elapsed between your last backup and the time of that incident. And on the other side is the recovery time objective. So that is how long has elapsed since the incident until you get back to full operational capacity. So it's the smaller those two times are, the better. If you can back up your org frequently, you're going to have a smaller recovery point objective. And if you have effective restore procedures, then your recovery time objective is going to be smaller as well, which minimizes the disruption. So what is the cost of data loss? Well, it varies wildly. So it's probably good to think about this in terms of your business. How would your business respond to an incident like this occurring? So it's disruptive. It's disruptive to the normal functioning of your organization. If users can't access the data they need, or then they won't be able to do their job. If they're working with the wrong data, then that's data that's been corrupted. They could be making bad decisions and not even know it. There's also a difference between losing that data temporarily. So if you are able to recover data and get it back into the org, that's a temporary state of affairs, but it's also possible for you to lose that data permanently. And it's kind of hard to imagine the amount of, well, some of the business critical data that you have if you just suddenly didn't have access to that anymore. Some of the other costs in play with data loss incidents, you can also be, depending on the industry you're in and the audit and compliance regulations that apply to you, you can get fined. So good backup tools will allow you to monitor changes to your org, so you'll be able to see incidents more quickly. And they'll also provide an audit trail of where changes have come from. You can also be fined for security breaches. So if you are maybe you're storing a backup insecurely somewhere, if you've created your own solution and that data gets out into the world, if someone gets access to your system, you leave your laptop on the train, you can get fined quite significantly for that. So I think the costs that I've covered so far are fairly tangible, but there are also some quite intangible costs. So if your company's public image is damaged by an incident, either through disruption or through getting in the headlines with a big data breach, you're going to lose client confidence and ultimately damage your brand. And it's very hard to quantify that, but it's a significant cost overall. So what is a backup solution? So in its very simplest terms, we want to look at the data that's in Salesforce, in your Salesforce org, make a copy of it and put it somewhere that isn't Salesforce. So we're storing it separately, so it's not in harm's way in the same manner. But it also involves monitoring. So I mentioned this earlier, but you want to be able to understand your org's data, see it change, and then be able to respond to incidents more quickly because you'll have seen the data change. If it's not normal for your org to delete 10,000 records in a night, then it's a sign that something's gone wrong. And it's much more efficient to do it that way than wait 3 days and have someone pick up the phone and tell you something's broken, and then you start to fix it. And another overlooked part of backup solutions is actually restoring the data. So it's all very well having that data safe and sound outside of Salesforce, but if you can't get it back into Salesforce, it's not worth a lot. And restoring data is especially hard because you need to, you'll be deploying into production. So it's a sensitive operation anyway, but you'll need to deploy records that relate to other records and not make, if you're responding to a data incident, then you don't want to make it worse by deploying the wrong data, because then you've got two problems. So what is a backup solution? Well, really, it involves monitoring, and it's a restore solution as well. So what are the options for a backup solution? So the first one is just do nothing. On the plus side, it is very easy, and it also doesn't cost anything. But there's a pretty big con here in that it's very risky and it leaves you very vulnerable. You can also do what I call a manual export. So you can click some buttons in Salesforce's UI and you can export a copy of your data, and you can download that in batches. Salesforce will generate those and it will give you them in a flat CSV. So that is free. Again, it's rolled into your license cost, and it's better than having nothing. It would still give you something to work from in the event of an incident. But on the downside, it's a manual process, so that involves someone clicking some buttons in Salesforce, and if you forget to do it 1 week, then that's that. So it relies on a human again. You can't do this more than once a week. So if you think of all of the changes that your org has seen today, yesterday, the day before, all of that won't be captured until the next time you do that export. So going again back to the recovery point objective. And if you are needing to restore that data, because Salesforce has served it up in these flat CSV files, it's not always the most convenient format to pull data from. Again, sometimes it's quite easy to lose that relationship between records. Also, if you're downloading these files, that contains highly sensitive customer information, and that data has to go somewhere. So again, leaving it kicking around on your laptop is very risky. So it does present another problem. Where are you going to store this data to make sure that it's secure? There is another option in building your own tool. On the plus side, it'll be customized to exactly what your business requires from a solution. Salesforce is an extremely customizable platform, so a solution you can tailor make to exactly your needs could be very effective. On the downside, it will take time, and it requires quite a lot of technical skill to access the various APIs, come up with a storage mechanism, and then be able to restore that data as well. So I think it's probably not going to make sense for the majority of sort of small, medium, even large businesses. If you're a particularly large organization with a lot of technical skill, then maybe it does make sense to go down that route. And the final option is a third-party tool. And I'm really talking about a good third-party tool here. So on the plus side, this is what Salesforce recommends you use after they retired their data recovery service. The official line was you should use a third-party tool to back up your org. So good backup solutions, they're going to be quick to set up. They're going to be automated, so you don't really need to worry about them once you've done that setup. And they don't require a lot of deep technical understanding. They're easy for anyone on your team to get on board with. They'll make it easy to back up your data, and they'll make it easier to restore your data. And they are also the ones that worry about storing that data securely. So it removes a lot of the headaches. There's a con here in that it's a paid-for tool, and that's something you have to balance against the costs of a data loss incident. So I will now hand over to Alex, who I think is going to share his screen. So I will stop sharing and let you take control.
Okay. Can you see that okay? Okay, so let's go into a bit of how you make the most of a backup solution. Say that you've decided to buy a tool and you want to sort of well, make or created your own tool, I guess, and you want to make sure that that gives you the most use. So what's important to think about here? So I'd say one of the big things is like make sure that you back up all the right stuff. So things like, well, data and metadata are both like equally important. So the metadata sort of showing you like controls things like permissions and stuff like that. And sometimes if things get changed around there due to like a messed up deployment or something like that, you want to be able to restore your metadata back to once it was and also restore the data. And you usually can't restore the data unless you've got the correct metadata in place. Another thing it's good to think about is sort of understanding your data model in the org. So you can think about what things that you need to back up and I guess like how often you want to think about backing them up. So say like accounts and leads and things like that, you want to back up quite frequently, whereas I guess maybe some of the logs and things like that are probably not quite so important to you on a day-to-day changes, but you'd like to keep them anyway. And I'd say also like understanding your solution a bit more. So practicing some scenarios. So we'll go into a couple of these a bit later on. And also sort of understanding like your org models, some of the connections, and what I guess like a normal day would look like. So say that if you start seeing accounts getting deleted, that might be something that should come up as a flag of something being a problem, whereas other things are being like deleted or changed all the time. And it will help you sort of get notified quickly when things are unexpected start to happen, and so you can go and resolve the problems much more quickly. So how might you go about recovering from the problems? So say always planning ahead. So you can't always be sure exactly what's going to happen, but to have a bit of a plan in place. So taking into account things like your data models, how long it is between the incident and how long you restore, and I guess like some of the scenarios and the potential impact that will have on your company. And yeah, I would also testing out this process is like a very important thing, just to make sure that you're fully comfortable with it. So when you're planning for these things, well, having a plan, it's always like really good as something to fall back on, because real incidents are often quite difficult to think about and can be quite stressful to deal with. And if you've got like a load of sales executives saying that I need this deal to come out, like I need to get access to this data, where's my account gone, and things like that, that could be quite a important to your business. And yeah, effectively dealing with these kind of things is much easier once you've once you've thought them through and you've got something in place to trust. And so yeah, like with regards to testing, so a lot of companies do things like this, test restore capabilities like once a year or something like that, just to sort of maybe run through some dummy incidents of what would happen if, I don't know, something got deleted or something got corrupted. And so if you practice a bit with your backup tool, you'll be able to recover from these if something bad did actually happen. And so when you're considering potential scenarios, you can think of maybe what kind of incidents you've seen before. So maybe something like I don't know, a user deleting an account might be quite a regular thing to happen that'd happen, because like human error and these kind of things happen maybe once a month or something like that. And then there's like other things like that could be like the Permageddon incident that's like quite rare, but you'd like to be able to think that if something like that did happen again, you'd be able to recover from it. Yeah, understanding what you need to restore as well is like quite important. So say that an opportunity or something like that, or a lead went missing, you might want to think about, well, what else do I need to make risk back with it? So say that it could just be that the lead has been deleted, but you actually need the account as well. And or you might have like hundreds of different custom objects, because Salesforce is very easily customizable and can be quite complex. So let's run through a couple of concrete examples that you might have. So we'll start off here with scenario 1. So this scenario, someone has gone in and deleted an account accidentally. And so the account had an opportunity that was on it, and we want to make sure that we can restore the account and the related opportunity. So only the data has changed in this case. So we don't need to be too worried about the metadata. So let's show an example of this with my favorite backup tool, that is the Gearset backup tool. So just a quick background. So it's quite easy to make a new job. So you can just like select an org. You can do things like set up some smart alerts. So say you think about accounts, you could have an alert if more than say 0 of those got deleted, or say you have something like a case, and you could say whenever any of those are changed, you can add an alert for those. And so you can add many alerts so that you're alerted about the data that's crucial to you that you're not expecting to change. So I've set up a job here, and when it last ran, it came through with one of these smart alerts. So it triggered saying that I had some records have changed in a custom object. We'll come back to that later. But we also had one record that's been removed from account and a record that's been removed from opportunity. So I think that this is something that we wouldn't expect to happen. So we jump into the backup history. So you would come into the job and got like a nice UI here, which will show things like for each column here represents like a run of the backup. And so you would have things like the number of records deleted, the number of changed records, new records in each run. And you can see in a bit more detail here in each row tells you like when it ran and like the objects that were changed and deleted. So let's jump into this run here. So I can see here I've got an account that was deleted and an opportunity that was deleted as well. So let's jump into the opportunity, load that up. So it's called opportunity on new account. I can jump into Salesforce. I can see, so it should be in here. So it was one that was created this week. And I can say, well, I can go and check with my sales exec and say, did you expect to delete this opportunity? And if they didn't, I can go about restoring it. So how would I do that? So I can tick the opportunity here. I can kick off a configure restore. And so this will take us into a way of like moving from our backup into our moving a record from the backup back into the org. And so we could also do things here, which we can start to look at some of the connections. So things here like, say I've got my record here, my opportunity record, but I also want to make sure that the account gets pulled in, and anything else that it was referring to, I want to make sure that that gets pulled into the restore as well. So I can start to kick this off, and we work out a few of our dependencies here. So all of the parent-child relationships that you might have within your objects and how they refer to each other. We're just going through, working out all of those and seeing what gets picked up. So you can see here, so the account and the user got picked up as things that we would want to pull into this deployment. So I can kick this off. And whilst we're just running through, so currently going through, making a plan of all the things that we need to restore and how we can pull these back in. And I'm just, let me just close this. And I can pull up, so all of the things that we're going to do. So we're going to fetch the opportunities and accounts from our backup run, and then go in and create those within Salesforce and make sure that they're referring to the correct opportunities and accounts. And so we're just running through this now. So it's pulled in our opportunity, and we're just now pushing this up into Salesforce. And hopefully once this is completed, so we've completed it here, we can then jump in to check our opportunity. Our opportunity has been restored, and we can see that it's also restored an account as well. So we can now go back to the salesperson and say, it's okay, you can now go and have a look at this this account and this opportunity, and all of the data is now back in Salesforce. So that was example number one. So we can go to example number two. So this is scenario two. This is when a field gets deleted from a custom object, and we want to make sure that the field gets restored along with any permissions related to it. And we want to make sure that the data also gets restored for the field. So what we need to make sure that we do this in a specific order. So we first of all sort out our metadata, and then we make sure, then we can push in our data that has changed. So let's go about this. So we can jump back into our data backup job. So I got this in the Smart Alert. This was the 6 records of custom object have been changed. And I just jump into here. I can say, I can view the details. I can see that this record has changed. I can see that my text value looks like it was something that used to exist on these records, but now it's been removed. So if I look at, say, object A, it looks like it's got my checkbox, and but it hasn't got the other value of my text value, which previously existed. So I can have a look at the metadata, and indeed, this custom field has been removed. So how do we go about, what can we do about that? So we can jump into the, jump back in to our backup, get a backup that happened before this change, and we can kick off a comparison of the metadata. So this might be familiar to those of you that have used the Gearset metadata compare and deploy tool. So what it's doing is we're getting the metadata from our backup, which we're treating as a source. We're getting the metadata from our current org, downloading all of that, and then we're going to do a comparison between the two. And so we'll see which things have changed and which things are missing between like on the org that are in our backup. So if I look at some of the new items, I can see that I've got a custom field here. So this is missing from my data from my org. So I can pull this in, and I can also work out some of the dependencies and things like that. So notice that I want to make sure that all of my profiles and permissions are all pulled in, and so that I've got all of my field level security added in, along with so got those permissions there. And I noticed there was also a translation and a layout, and so we'll pull all of those across and deploy the metadata changes back into our org that we've backed up. So we can also keep a bit of an audit trail for this. So I can copy this and put in restore this field, and deploy that back into my org. So I'm pushing this in, it's running through each of the components that we're pushing up. So we're pushing in the field and all of the items, and we've got a list here of all of the changes that have gone in. And so if we go into the object, I do a refresh here, it looks like it's got my text value has come back in. So we've got back along with the page layout and things like that. So unfortunately, though, however, we haven't got the correct value back in there yet. So to do that, we can jump back into our demo, our org, like the backup of the org. We can select all of the records that we'd like to restore. We can then kick off a quick restore of those records, and so that will push all of the values back in to our Salesforce org. So it just goes and checks any like dependencies and works out a plan of how it's going to push those up first of all. And then we can and they will then be pushed into our Salesforce org, and so they'll be fully restored back into it. So it's picked up all of these. So you've got all the record IDs that it's picked up there. Gives you a little warning saying that these are being restored, and so just restore those. And hopefully, once these should go in fairly quickly. So these have now all been restored. I can then refresh the page, and here it is. We've got the value has been restored back into Salesforce. And we can also look into a bit of an audit trail of this, so we can see all of the things that have been restored and like back to my org in a table here. So let's go back to presenting, back to the presentation, and I'll pass back over to Ali.
Cool, thanks very much. So that was all of the sort of content that we wanted to cover. What it's worth sharing with you now is that if you need any more information, then you can just go to gearset.com, and that will take you anywhere else you need to go. There's some really, really useful resources on there. In particular, relevant to you guys, there is a free white paper on backups for Salesforce. So some of the content that we covered today is gone into in a lot more detail. There's a bunch of other stuff in there as well. So if this is a subject that is important to you, I highly recommend checking that out. And it's, again, we try and make it a useful resource that's agnostic of Gearset. I think there's a lot of objective advice in there. There's other stuff on there as well. I've just pulled out an example of some customer stories. So if you want to read some case studies about some of our other customers and how they've got up and running with Gearset and the benefits it's given them, then you can check those out. And the other thing that's worth pointing out is that if you aren't a Gearset user yet, you can start a free trial. So if you go to gearset.com, there'll be a button there to start a free trial of the tool itself, and you can use all of the features for free for 30 days with no limitations, and you don't need to put in your credit cards or anything like that. You don't need to install anything in your org. So it's definitely worth checking out if you haven't already. And one other thing that we should tell you about is on the 25th of March, which is a month from today, Gearset is hosting a summit on the future of Salesforce DevOps. So there is a URL down there, but also you can find it on gearset.com as well, and you can sign up. It should be good. So I will pass it over to you guys. So if you have any questions for me and Alex, then please drop them in the chat. We'll give you a couple of minutes to type them in.
So it looks like there's a question here from Eric Gonzalez about, can you talk about file recovery?
Sure. So I think that's a really interesting point. So files are a bit different, and they can be a bit tricky. So some of the challenges that we found when backing up files is that obviously they tend to be a bit bigger. There are limitations on various APIs in Salesforce, so you need to be careful when you retrieve them, and then they take up a lot more storage space than just normal data. In terms of restoring them, so some of the subtle differences are depending on whether you create a file using the classic Salesforce view or the Lightning view, those actually manifest as slightly different Salesforce records under the hood, and they need to be handled differently. So there's another level of difficulty there, and I think probably one of the bigger challenges that we found in implementing this is actually particularly with content versions. So that's the Lightning created one, the newer version, is you need to tie those binary files back to the object that actually owns them, and that's not a simple process. So it can be a bit difficult to do. Was there something more specific, Eric, that you wanted me to go into there? Hopefully I've answered your question, but if not, we can come back around. I see you've asked that.
There was a follow-up question about like, can data be stored in my data center as opposed to the Gearset data center?
Yeah, that's a great question. So currently the answer is, well, the short answer is no. So Gearset has a couple of different regions available. So you can, the sovereignty of the data that Gearset holds can either be based in the US or in the EU. Yeah, the infrastructure that Gearset uses, we heavily use Amazon Web Services, which often gets called AWS, which is a lot of the same technology that Salesforce itself runs on. But yeah, the only data centers that Gearset, that the users of Gearset can use are the ones controlled by Gearset. I think it's the format that Gearset stores that data in is a proprietary format as well. So it's quite specific to our needs, so it won't always be easily accessible for a person outside of Gearset. Cool, and I can see a question from Cornelia. You mentioned corruption and permission and controls. Can you restore these? I don't know, Alex, do you want to field that one?
Yes. So so if there are problems with permissions or controls, so we do offer as part of the data backup. So we do back up your you can back up your permissions as part of that, and you can restore the restore the metadata through that. Or there are other options. So we do have these within different parts of the Gearset tool that can. So your data backup, I guess, would run on a usually on a daily basis, although you can get ones that run every hour. But we also have other tools that are sort of specified towards permissions that give you like very detailed reports, and you can get a job to monitor those specifically.
Cool. I can see another question coming in from an anonymous attendee. Are the daily backups full or incremental? That's a good question, and I think the terms full and incremental are quite overloaded, and often people misunderstand, or it might mean one thing to one person and mean something a bit different to someone else. So the way that Gearset's backup tool works is that every single run of the backup job captures the whole state of the org at that point in time. So if to you that means it's a full backup every time, then it's a full backup every time. We do a lot of clever stuff under the hood, so we're trying to balance using API calls of the org, so they can be quite intensive to request millions of records. We're also balancing accuracy and performance, so the amount of time that it takes to actually run a backup job. So it's not quite as simple as them being full or incremental, and those terms are can be a bit confusing. But the key thing to think of it is the whole state of your org is captured on every single run. So any piece of data that exists in your org on that day, that will be retrievable from a backup.
Yeah, so there's another question here that I think we can. Oh, let me. So it was about deleting a record from all. Deleting a specific record from all previous backups. So yes, I can show you how you might do that in Gearset. So you can go to your backup jobs, and we have a way that if you have the record ID that you'd like to delete for, say, GDPR reasons or something like that, you can remove a record from the history. So you give it the Salesforce record ID in there, and then we just have a little confirmation, and then that removes it from all previous backups. So legally, it's all removed completely.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for those questions. I'll just give another minute just in case anyone else has got anything else that they want to ask. But in the meantime, I'll just say thanks very much for attending. We hope you found it useful. And if you have any questions at all, you can go to gearset.com. There's a bunch more information there, and you can get in touch with the team and ask us questions directly as well. But thanks a lot.